Oftentimes at Camp Perry, there's going to be delays on the firing line. It may be a boat in the impact area. It may be a bald eagle landing. It may be lightning. It may be some people walking across young range, cutting the corner, not knowing they're not supposed to do that when there's firing on both ranges. But all of these delays are going to happen. You just have to prepare yourself for them and accept them and roll with the punches. You know, it's easy to get frustrated. It's easy to get, you know, really kind of discouraged with how slow things go. But it's part of Camp Perry. The thing you don't want to do is you don't want to let it interfere with your shot process. You don't want to let it interfere with your routine. Oftentimes this has happened. You lay down in rapid fire, let's say you're in prone rapid, and then there's a delay and there's a postponement of shooting and a ceasefire due to whatever reason. And you may have to lay in position 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or longer. Sometimes if it's a really long delay, they make you get up out of position and you basically have to move behind the ready line, and it might be, you know, 20, 30 minutes or longer. Any of these delays, you need to mentally prepare for. It happens up here. We don't like it to happen, but it does. So instead of getting yourself all tied up in a knot and getting frustrated, the tail is not going to wag the dog. Accept it, stay in your bubble, reset the reset button, and when it's your time to go back to the line or it's time to resume the preparation period or what have you, you go ahead, get back in your bubble, you have your shot process, you have that routine, you pick up where you left off, and you don't miss a beat. Your performance and your scores don't suffer. One of the key factors of shooting at Camp Perry on the long line is keeping a good data book, as I've mentioned several times, and knowing your zeros, etc. But also it's being patient. Sometimes there'll be a wind condition that is favorable for you to shoot in, and a lot of times shooters feel compelled to rush and shoot their shots too early. There's nothing wrong if you've been paying attention to previous relays and recognizing, well, it's going to pick up for 10 minutes, but then it's going to slow down and I'll have a window to shoot in. Well, if you know that in about 5 minutes there's should be a lull that'll allow you to shoot in a certain wind condition that's favorable, there's nothing wrong with laying there and just looking in the scope, breathing, relaxing, getting good, great body position, natural point of aim, and paying attention to what other shooters are doing. You can learn an awful lot about what's going on by letting other shooters shoot first. A lot of times the first person down range is the first person shooting into a wind condition, and they might get lucky and they might call it right, or they might be the one that everybody else goes, whoa, that's a little more wind than I thought, because that person still pushed out the left. So you need to basically be patient and have a strategy when you shoot long line here at Camp Perry. The other really critical thing to do is when you get a wind condition, don't mess around. Young shooters, new shooters have a tendency to want to agonize over every shot. One thing that young and new shooters tend to do is they want to basically overanalyze each shot, especially in the long line. They take way too long. They lay on the gun far too long. When you have a favorable wind condition and you know that your zero is good and you know that you're ready to roll, shoot your shot, and I mean be ready when that target comes up to drop the next shot. Now there's tricks, you know, a lot of people might wait for the target to come up, see their shot value, then write that shot value down. That takes too long sometimes. Up here you want to shoot and get the bullets down range. What I'll oftentimes do is I will say, look, okay, I'm going to score the value of the shot that I shot 2 shots ago, like not the one I just shot, but the previous one. You write the shot value down after you've let the next round go. It's not that complicated to do, and it gives you a little more time to stay in the scope and to stay on top of the conditions. Under extreme conditions, I won't even record my shots. I'll sometimes just say, look, it's more important to get my rounds down range, and as soon as I break a shot, I'll look in the scope, and as soon as I come up and see where that spotter's at, and if it verifies that my shot was correct or my wind call was correct and I didn't call it, you know, a bad shot, I roll over and I drop that next shot. It's quite possible to shoot 20 shots in a very short amount of time as long as you have good pit service. Sometimes you're not going to have good pit service. You'll have to prepare for that. Don't be afraid to call a line officer and say, hey, you know, mark 23. And if it happens 2 or 3 times, say, I request 23 speed up the pit service. They're taking too long. You know, we're all out here to help each other. We want to give good pit service to each other, but sometimes you might have a young shooter. You might have, you know, a shooter that's maybe not physically able to run the target frame as quickly as you would like. But those are things you got to shoot around. But It's oftentimes a good idea to let the line officer know you're experiencing some pit service problems in case it goes into too long and you need extra time added. That way that they have a precedent, and the line, that's what they're there for. So it's not really being a whiner as long as you're doing it only when it's necessary. Now obviously some shooters are constantly whining about something. Well, you know what? When they're whining, they're not focusing on shooting. And whiners basically are not going to perform well because they're too busy distracting themselves with what's wrong rather than focusing on what's right and focusing on what's making their performance better. A lot of times at Camp Perry, you're going to come out here and shoot in some excessive wind. It's going to be intimidating. It's going to be brutal some days. The worst part of it is offhand. I remember one year, many years ago, we went down and we're shooting offhand for the President's 100. One of the AMU guys is shooting to my left. There's, a Marine shooter to my right. I came off the line, and I want to say I shot an 87 off my feet. Any other day, that would be a pretty mediocre score. On that day, I was thrilled because the AMU guy had shot a miss. The Marine to my, and these are big shooters on the big team. The AMU guy on the left had shot a miss. The guy on my right had shot a couple of fives, and it was that tough a condition. I mean, it was brutal. I mean, it almost seemed silly we were trying to shoot in that kind of wind. Welcome to Camp Perry, baby. That's just what you get some years. Usually it's very, very good. It's just a mild breeze in the mornings, not a problem. But occasionally if a front's coming through, there's some kind of weird weather phenomena that's coming through, some weird things can happen up here. And in those conditions, all you can do is do the best you can. You have to mentally prepare yourself that you may have to shoot in that condition. Here's what most people do. They try to continue shooting the way they would if there was no wind. And that's a recipe for failure. When you're in those conditions, you have to kind of hunker yourself down, you try to make yourself smaller, and you have to lower your standard of excellence. Whatever your acceptable level of performance is usually, well, you're gonna have to reevaluate that, because I don't think you're gonna be able to just hold the 10 ring in, a 25-mile-an-hour gusty wind condition consistently. So you might wanna roll back and say, look, if I can just hold the black, I'm gonna do great. I mean, there are days that a 91 is the high score in terrible wind conditions or terrible weather conditions. So again, it's a matter of a mental preparation, allowing yourself to sort of be in that moment. You have to tell yourself, this isn't normal, so it's silly to expect that your normal process is going to carry the day and be able to let you perform your best. You have to have sort of an alternative plan, a fallback plan. How do you practice shooting in the wind? Well, some people will tell you you're not supposed to, don't do it. Other people will tell you to go out and shoot and experiment. Other people will tell you that, it is what it is. You just sort of get through it. It's tough to practice in the wind unless you have a place that's consistently windy. Some of the shooters out west, it's not a problem. It seems like it's always windy on their ranges. People on the East Coast, it's a little tougher because usually there's more mountains and geographical features that give us some more calm spots in our ranges. But at Camp Perry, this giant open field gives you nowhere to hide. So when you're up there and it's buffeting and you're sitting there trying to hold that shot, sometimes the stick it and rip it technique is the best way to go. It might be a bad habit, but maybe to get through that match, that's what you have to do, is just try to stick it in the black and get that shot off. You sit there and try to dress it up and you're trying to shoot those perfect X's, you're gonna have a miserable day and it's gonna really put a ding on your confidence, and that's something that's tough to shake off in just a matter of days or something. It could set up a precedence for really putting a downer on your week if it happens early in the week at Camp Perry. When you're calling the wind at Camp Perry and you're trying to make a wind call, this is sort of the tough part for a lot of new shooters. There's a tendency to want to ask other shooters, hey, what did you have on the gun? Well, there's a little story that's kind of funny. There was a big team shooter and there was a young shooter, and the big team shooter went up and shot, and as he came back, the young shooter said, hey, what did you have on for wind? And the big team shooter said, I had 3 left on. He's like, all right, great. So the young shooter goes up and he shoots his rapid fire string, and everything is way out the right. And he comes back just stomping mad, and he comes back and he walks by that big team shooter and he goes, hey, you told me you had 3 left on, and I went up there and put 3 left on, and everything was way out the right. And the big team shooter looked at him and says, yeah, it was for me too. So the moral of the story is, just because another person's putting a dope on doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that it worked for them. And it's kind of one of those things where the best technique is to develop your own wind calling skills. You want to be able to determine that you have the ability to say, look, I see this condition and I know it's 2.5 to 3 minutes. And when you lay down and you've got that confidence, you're not wondering about, boy, I wonder if I'm getting blown out while you're shooting. You're focusing on sight alignment. You're focusing on trigger control. You're focusing on natural point of aim. You're focusing on breathing. And therefore your groups and your actual shooting process is better. Here at Camp Perry, you're oftentimes going to shoot in conditions that are less than favorable. For instance, sometimes it can rain so hard up here that you swear you're in the middle of a hurricane. I remember one time laying down in a match where the shooting point at 300 yards was kind of scalloped out. It was full of water, and when I actually laid down with my M1A to actually shoot, the crook of my elbow was literally underwater. The whole coat and everything was underwater, essentially like 6 or 7 inches of water. I couldn't get into a different shooting point. There was no way to get around it. It just was what it was. When you find yourself faced with those conditions, all you can do is the best you can do. Everyone else is shooting in the same terrible conditions that you are. The biggest thing you have to remind yourself is don't let it get you out of your shot process any more than it has to. Try to stay focused, do the best you can, kind of mentally prepare for it, shoot your way through it, try to focus on the basics, and again, just do the best you can under the circumstances that you find yourself shooting in. A lot of times, young shooters, inexperienced shooters, let those situations, let that environment, let those weather situations get them totally out of their routine, and they start making simple mistakes like not putting the right amount of ammo in their magazines or forgetting to drop the bolt or what have you. Accept it, do the best you can. Everyone else is struggling in the same conditions you are. Do the best you can, and you'll usually find that if you still perform at your best under those conditions, everything evens out in the end. Let's talk about the President's 100 match. In my opinion, it is the most challenging and most difficult service rifle match in existence that I know of. Why is it so challenging? Here's the reason. Basically, you're going into a match cold, and you don't have a chance to verify your zeros before you actually get to go put rounds down range for score. So you're having to rely on what you hope your elevation is or what you hope your zero is. Here's a little secret. All the big service teams, they come up and shoot matches in May or earlier here at Perry so that they can get some dope on their guns. Now, the CMP has recognized that, they want to try to make things a little bit easier. So starting in 2010, they started allowing the practice, the squatted practice, to allow shooters to come up and they shoot actually at the 300-yard line here, and they shoot at the 600-yard line. That's a huge advantage now for people who haven't made the President's 100. If you're trying to shoot your way into that match and you're trying to put a score up that gets you in, you're going to be in the mid-280s or higher to guarantee yourself a spot in that. The reason the President's 100 is so difficult is it's not like a leg match. You're not shooting against other non-distinguished shooters. You're not shooting against the best of the guys who haven't become the best yet. You're shooting against the best guys and girls. You're shooting against people who are year in and year out in the top 100. So really, realistically, there's only about 20 positions in the top President's 100 that are up for grabs because most of those shooters are so consistent year in and year out, they've got 80 of those spots locked down. As a civilian shooter, and if you make the cut, count how many civilian names are above yours, and you'll realize that most of those guys are professional shooters. So it's a great accomplishment, but it's very challenging. With the rule change with the CMP, this is going to make it a little easier because now you can come out the day before, you can actually lay down at the 300-yard line, you can shoot, and they allow you to shoot slow fire, so you can verify your zero. You get, 10 shots or so to go, yeah, my zero's right on. Again, I have to basically reiterate, your data book is critically important. This data book right here is what's going to allow you to perform your best. At Camp Perry, you're only here one time a year. It's not like you get to shoot here every month for most of us. So this data is critically important. Recording solid data will help you not just in the next match, but the next year and the next year. Now, of course, this kind of stuff builds up. The bigger catalog of data you have, the more stuff you have to draw from.